Well, if you turn off your television today, you are going to miss the most exciting interview that perhaps we've ever done.
Yeah.
At least most interesting, wouldn't you say so, C.A.?
Of the Heritage Series interviews that we've done thus far, and all of them have been great.
Oh, they have
But
been.
our guest today brings a little special something. Mostly for me, he's a New York guy.
Yeah.
And he's never lost that New York touch. But also he tells a great story, and he's lived a fantastic life for the Lord. He really has.
See, this is really true. And he was a person that the Lord just reached down into the ghetto and snatched him.
Yeah.
He took him. This is Ron Halvorsen we're talking about. And I think if any of you know who Ron is, then you know this is going to be an exciting interview. You are correct. Everybody we have talked to has just been very, very exciting. And this is our latest one, so this is the most exciting one to me.
It is. What's interesting, our editor, Len Wenzel, who's edited all of these, of course, he said, you know, it took me a little more time to edit this one because I was actually watching and listening because Ron is a unique individual. Of course, you know him very well. He's from a tough section of Brooklyn. When he tells about the part of Brooklyn that he grew up in, I know that section of Brooklyn. It's tough to this day, and kids come out tough. And the Lord really reached down and plucked a brand from the burning in bringing Ron Halvorsen, and he's lived such a wonderful life for the Lord.
Well, it's such an exciting story, and it really ties back to an evangelistic campaign that people thought was a failure. It was held by R. Allen Anderson in New York City at Carnegie Hall. And they just thought this campaign was a total failure. It just about destroyed evangelism in North America.
Yeah.
And then two ladies accepted the Lord. Now, there were others that were baptized as well. But these were two ladies that they could point to that just walked in off the street.
Yes.
One of them had a grandson, Jim Landis.
Yes.
And the lady brought her grandson to the Lord. Her grandson just got on fire for Jesus. Jim Landis did.
Yes.
And he went and shared with Ron. And you're going to hear that story. Ron wasn't an easy person to share with or to witness to. He was a rough guy, a switchblade carrying, street gang leader, leather jacket type, just would steal anything that wasn't tied down. I mean, he tells this story, folks.
Yeah.
And God saw something in this man.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Jim, and our viewers should look out for this. Ron was a tough guy, and his fists were flying up until the night of his ordination.
Yeah, you'll hear about that.
There's a cute story, too, with that.
You'll hear about that. And the Lord converts, but the Lord does not always change our personalities immediately. And some of those things take a little longer. Some of us are still battling with some of those things.
Yes.
But this is one of the most exciting conversion stories and ministry stories that I have ever witnessed. Because, you know, those of our group that we have talked to almost exclusively had parents who really loved the Lord, who embraced this message, and who nurtured those young people through their youth, and were such a great example. One of which, Elder Bradford's mother, actually worked for Ellen White.
Yes, spoke with her.
But now this is the example of someone who their parents knew nothing about this faith or perhaps any faith. And yet God reached down, plucked him, took him. He's been an influence to his own family and to thousands and thousands and thousands of people all over the world.
Sort of pulled himself up by his bootstraps and was possessed of a desire to preach that has not abated to this very day.
No, that's right. He's one of the very finest speakers that we have in our denomination.
Yes.
Without a question.
Very, very true.
A prayer warrior, a man that loves prayer, believes in prayer, does a lot of prayer walking, has written a book about prayer. And it's one of the best sellers for prayer.
I think one of the most popular books on prayer, used in prayer meetings across the world, let alone the country.
Yeah.
Powerful.
So we got in touch with Ron while we were in Tampa, Florida. We were there at Mount Calvary Church doing a special program, and this is the interview that we had with Ron Halvorsen in Tampa. We welcome you to the fourth installment in our Heritage series. We have been talking to some of God's leaders, people who committed their lives to Jesus Christ when they were in their youth, and how the Lord has used them in furthering the gospel. And we have such a person today, Elder Ron Halvorsen. And Pastor Ron Halvorsen, we welcome you to our program today. And C.A. and I count it a real privilege to visit with you and to talk with you. I'm an old Texan, but I went to New England when I was young, and we became friends at that time. And we got a couple of New Yorkers here, and I know that we've got some interesting dialogue ahead, because anytime you get two New Yorkers together, it's bound to be a very interesting conversation. But we have been just talking a little bit before we began about your actually being born. You were born in a hospital that was a little different than your brothers and sisters were born in. And I've often wondered why you spelled your name a little differently than your brother spells his, Richard.
Well, the family thinks I don't want to be connected, but that's not the real reason. The reason was that I was born in a Norwegian hospital in Brooklyn. Yeah. And my other brothers were born in a Jewish hospital. And somehow they spelled the name in the Jewish hospital, Halvorsen, V-E-R-S-E-N. But when I was born in a Norwegian hospital, Norwegian descent, the Norwegian doctor saw that name and he says, I'm not going to make a Swede of you. You're a Norwegian boy. So he spelled it V-O-R-S-E-N. And that was the original spelling when our grandparents came from Norway. So I took that, and it was on my birth certificate, and the family has disputed it for many years, but I finally proved it when I went to Norway. I went to Norway, and the Norwegians accepted me as a Norwegian. When my brother went there, they says, you're not a Norwegian, you don't spell your name like a Norwegian. So I'm the authentic breed. The others are just, they're just part of the clan.
So you were born in Brooklyn, New York?
Brooklyn, New York, that's right.
And grew up where?
Once the fourth largest city in America.
Yes, right. And then you grew up where?
I grew up in Coney Island, which was just a part of Brooklyn. Okay. Yeah, it was once an island, then they made it a peninsula. They covered it in, and it became a peninsula. It was the amusement center, and it was also a crime center, but Coney Island at that time, anyway, it was more the inner city than it was what it is now, more middle-class people.
See, most of us have only heard of it as an amusement center. You mean there are houses there and so
forth? There's neighborhoods, yeah. Runs from Neptune Avenue up to Surf Avenue, and from West 1st Street to, 36th or something, and Seagate. It goes out to Seagate. Yeah. And I was born in Bay Ridge, raised in Coney Island, West 6th Street, and Neptune Avenue.
See, if you know New York, you can, that accent, which he has not lost, so he's been all over the world. I said Bay Ridge, Canarsie.
You were close.
Yeah, because that's a typical Brooklyn Bay Ridge kind of accent. He has not lost that all of these years.
Yeah, someone asked me once, they said, why do you keep this accent? I said, why? I mean, when I get to heaven, I'll have to learn it all over again. So, I keep it. I keep it.
Elder, when did your parents come to this country? Your grandparents actually come to
My grandparents came the early, in the mid-20s. And they came from, my grandpa was a shipbuilder in Norway, the western part of Norway. And the Halvorsens are shipbuilders in Norway, even today. I was in Australia, in fact, I saw Halvorsen shipbuilders. And so my grandfather came here to Brooklyn. Paulson, the president of the General Conference, he's a Norwegian, and he said, well, the Halvorsens stopped in Brooklyn. Every other Norwegian went to Minnesota. I told him the reason we stopped in Brooklyn was because there was a bar and grill on every corner in Brooklyn. So that's why we got stopped in Brooklyn. But my dad was, all the boys and girls were born in Norway except my father. My grandmother was pregnant for my father. She was impregnated in Norway, but he was born in Brooklyn. So he's best of both worlds anyway. And we were raised there in Coney Island in a tenement, and spent most of my time till I was 18. And then I went to, I moved to Queens. My parents moved out to Long Island, but I still stayed in the city until I went off to college.
Elder, you alluded to growing up sort of on the tough streets of Coney Island. What was it like back then for your brothers and sisters? You growing up in Coney Island, a little rough. It's not as sanitized as it is today. Give us a little flavor of growing up in Coney Island, Brooklyn.
Well, one thing about Coney Island is when you grow up in poverty, whether it's the Bronx or Manhattan or Brooklyn, poverty has a way of corrupting you. It has a way of, it has a way of destroying anything moral and ethical in a person, because they grab out. I don't have, I have to have. Why do they have and I don't have? And so you grow up with that mentality that, I'm going to take it if I don't have it. And so that's the street mentality. Street mentality is who can I con? Where can I get something for nothing? And so I grew up, even as a young kid, learning from the street, learning from at that time, the gangs. There were a lot of gangs in New York. There were 200 fighting gangs in New York City at that time. And the Mafia Murder Incorporated had its headquarters in Coney Island. The head witness against Murder Incorporated was killed, thrown out of a Half Moon Hotel, so he couldn't testify against the Mafia at the time. So we were used to that. We used to cars coming around the corner, gunning someone down, and so death was real. The streets were tough streets.
Sure.
You had to act tough to survive. You knew when to fight, when to run. So it became instinctive. You see a car, you can't afford a car, so you steal a car.
Yeah.
How do you steal a car? Well, you learn. Well, how do you learn? The guys in the neighborhood, everybody's hot wiring a car. And so, wow, hey, you saw a little kid, 12, 13. They think 12 or 13, that's a cute little tiny kid. Hey, a kid 12 and 13 in the inner city, he's wiser than those about the world, about things like that.
Sure.
So I was hot wiring cars until I'm 14. I'm breaking and entering, how to get in the back, how to get out, what to look for, who you're going to mug, which pocketbook you should steal. That's all becomes a part of your existence. Just like someone learns ABC, learns about paying bills.
Sure.
We learned about how to get money from the street, how to survive in the street, how to live. You knew when to run. You knew when it was going to go down. So that's how I grew up. I grew up with that mentality that if you want it, you take it. If you don't get caught, great. You get caught, hey, that's your tough luck. And so that was started at a very early age. Candy from candy stores, bikes from rich boys in Brighton Beach. Couldn't have a bike, right?
Yeah.
I want a bike. I can't get. My father couldn't get one. My father was the hardest working man I've ever known, but he never made big money. People say, why don't they get out of the ghetto? Why don't they get? How do you get out of quicksand?
Right.
I mean, how does a man with 6 kids get out with a small paying job? They can't get out. Your heart goes out to them. So my best alternative was try to work my way out, or steal my way out, or fight my way out. So that's the mentality that you grow up with. You see it around you. The model is not the model of honesty, of ethics, of morality.
Sure.
The model is con. The model is who can you con out of this? How can you get that? And so that's how we grew up. And Coney Island was notorious for that. It was notorious for its crime, for its violence. It was a very violent city. I mean, young guys shot down, young guys stabbed. I mean, we saw that as a natural thing. And the school didn't do much better. Put you in special classes, and you even become more angry. Because here you are sitting in a class.
Yeah, you're labeled.
You know how embarrassing it is?
Sure.
Stand up, walk out, and the kids laugh. There's a special student.
Yeah.
And so you fight back. And you're in trouble with the principal. You're in trouble with the law. So that was my childhood. My parents didn't have faith. They didn't have a spiritual experience. My mom was a good mother. She tried to keep a tenement clean, chase the cockroaches up to the next tenement, and then they'd chase them down, chase the rats upstairs, and then they come down. So that was the poverty.
Yeah.
It was. I can't describe the poverty, and poverty breeds whatever they want to say.
Yeah.
Poverty breeds that kind of mentality.
Yeah. Now you formalized your anger. Actually, you did a little boxing.
Well, I was an amateur fighter. I won gold medals, and I was at that time I was light heavyweight. Now I'm super heavyweight, but I was a light heavyweight. I started out really in the Pee Wee league, and I was maybe less than a featherweight. But you fight your way,
Sure.
and I trained 5 nights a week, and I was in the Ocean Avenue Boxing Club and a boxing club in Brooklyn where Floyd Patterson came out of that. Some great boxers came out of the fighting club. And then by the time I was teenage, 14, 15, I was fighting. And you fight weight class. You don't fight age. So I'm fighting Golden Glove guys. I can't even fight in the Golden Gloves. I'm too young. I'm fighting a guy 27 years old, but I'm fighting in that lane. And I was a pretty good boxer and won gold medals. I knocked out the Eastern Golden Glove champion. I was only 15. I couldn't fight in the Golden Gloves, but I fought in other tournaments. And so I was boxing. I was fighting in the streets. I was a good fighter in the streets. You had to be a good fighter in the streets anyway to survive. And so that was my mentality. If I want it, I take it. Don't mess with me.
Yeah, yeah.
My brother, for instance, my brother and I wake up in the morning. He says, "Hey, let's go look for a fight." I mean, just like someone said, "Hey, let's go pick strawberries." In the city, the inner cities, "Hey, let's go look for a fight." Or we'll say, "Hey, let's take a ride down to Bay Ridge. So we hotwire a car, drive down to Bay Ridge." That was abnormal, but it was normal for the life of the ghetto, the life of the inner city. And it's amazing when I hear today what they say about the ghetto. Most of them haven't even lived in the ghetto.
Yeah.
They don't know, but I understand the mentality.
So much about survival.
Yeah, and so that's why my ministry took on working a lot in the cities. I've been a missionary to the cities of America. I've spent my whole life doing that. But my parents didn't have faith. They didn't have religious background. Well, they Lutheran. You're Norwegian, so you're Lutheran. You're sent to catechism class, but you know.
Well, you're talking about faith. How did you become acquainted with Jesus Christ and this message? How did you get involved?
The exciting thing about it is that Jesus Christ is acquainted with you.
Yeah.
Before you ever become acquainted with him.
That's right.
I mean, so he looks. People look down at Halvorsen, black leather jacket, skull, blood dripping over the skull. Looking for fights, getting into trouble, always in detention. Always. So that's what they see. But Jesus Christ saw a kid in the rough. And so he's watching this scene.
Yeah.
I can picture it now. He's watching this scene. Here's Halvorsen. He's in trouble again tonight. But I can do something for him.
Yeah.
And he does it in a miraculous way.
Yeah.
You see, we think that we got to get people in the church and then we'll convert them. And no, you see, God works out in the street, and he sends people into your life. And you got that opportunity. If you don't take that opportunity, then your life is messed up the rest of your life. So here I am. I'm in this notorious high school. We couldn't hardly read or write. I could functionally literate. I could read comic books with enough pictures. I'm in trouble. I have my own truant officer. I'm always playing hooky. And a young teenager in my neighborhood, he's only 14, 15 maybe. He's converted, becomes a Christian. And so he wants to share faith. So where does he go? He don't have a church pulpit to preach from. He talks to the kids in the neighborhood.
Sure.
So we're not going to have we're not going to mess around with any of this stuff. The religion's for old people. Foot in the casket, one on a banana peel, boom, that's when you get religion, you see, but we're cool. And he's not cool, but yet he's spiritual. He has something that we don't have. He has peace. He's smiling. Every time I hear a police siren, man, I'm ducking in an alley. They're coming for me. Every time there's a knock at the door, he's not. He has peace. And there's a serenity about him. There's just something about the look in his face.
Wow.
And he's trying to share faith. And of course, since I'm a close friend, since the 3rd grade, he says, "Halvorsen, I found something, Halvorsen. Religion." And we laughed. We called him Isaiah. I don't know if someone in the neighborhood knew the name. We didn't know, but I'd never read my Bible in my life. But I couldn't have read it anyway if I tried to.
Now, I just want to put a pin there. You had faked it to high school, but really couldn't read At high school level. You
Yeah.
somehow
Well, we didn't even fake it. They wanted to get rid of us.
So this
I
passed
was
you
in
on.
trouble so much in school.
Yeah.
What teacher wanted Halvorsen 2 years in a row? No, get rid of him. So they push you ahead. They push you ahead.
Yeah.
And so when I was being pushed ahead, it's third grade, I failed twice, but went through it twice. But after that, they didn't want to mess with me anymore.
Right.
So they pushed me ahead. Pushed me ahead.
Yeah.
And so there were two high schools. There was Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, which most of the kids wanted to go with a good future and wanted to get education. And the others went to William E. Grady Vocational High School. It was really a preparation school for reform school.
Yeah.
And it was a tough school. On every car, they have policemen. I mean, this is a tough school. Kids go for on strike. 2,000 kids walk out of school. A minute more for lunch, or they beat up on a teacher, hold them out from the 5th floor window. You know, I mean, this is the kind of school. That's where I am. But this other kid, he receives Christ into his life.
Wow.
He's talking about God, and we're making fun of him and laughing, and he says, I want to share the Bible with you. I want to share faith with you. I said, hey, man, I don't want anything to do with religion.
How had he found faith?
This is the amazing thing. He didn't come from religious, except his grandfather was a Pentecostal minister, but he didn't have anything to do much with his grandfather. But his grandmother, on the other side, went to a crusade, an evangelistic meeting at Carnegie Hall in 1951 or 52, and she hears this marvelous message of Jesus Christ. Her life is changed. She hears the great truths of the Bible, and she accepts these things. At the end of the series of meetings, they brought 50 ministers in, spent $250,000. You can imagine the rent Carnegie Hall for a whole year, 1 night, 2 nights a week.
They had the Faithful Day Quartet there every
They had
night.
everything there.
Marilyn Cotton was there.
Yeah, they were all there. And R. Allen Anderson, one of the great prophetic lecturers.
Right.
Sure.
And his book on Revelation, Daniel, are still a classic, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, at the end of this meeting, there's just a few people that receive Christ. Few people are baptized in the kingdom of God. So they go away defeated. He's crushed. From New York, he's crushed, R. Allen Anderson.
Yeah.
But a little old lady from Brooklyn is sitting in this meeting, and she receives Christ in her life. Her life is changed. I mean, she's a beautiful woman, a beautiful old lady. She comes back. She wants to share it. No one can encounter Jesus Christ and not want to share him.
That's right.
Yes.
I mean, that's as natural as a flower seeks the sun. It's as natural as a flower seeks the rain. When one finds Christ, or Christ finds one, naturally you have to share it. So she goes back. Who's she going to share it with? She leads her husband to Christ. He becomes a Christian. She has a grandson, Jimmy. Jimmy's a kid. His mother's single. Mom, his father left, and you know, it's that poverty.
Sure.
Lives over a candy store on Neptune Avenue. This little kid.
Yeah.
Smart as a whip, though, but he's an inner-city kid, poor kid. And his grandmother comes and shares Christ. And Jimmy, his mother doesn't accept it, but Jimmy does. And his life has changed.
Praise God.
And he's carrying his Bible in the neighborhood, and everybody's making fun of him. But every time we're in trouble, boom, we look up Jimmy, because there he is.
Yeah.
And so Jimmy's sharing his faith with me. He says, come to a Bible study. Kept bugging me and bugging me. I finally said, hey, okay, I'll go, just one. I went to this Bible study. It was on the second coming of Christ.
Whoa.
And so after he says, well, what do you think of that? I said, that can't, you know, come on, you know, that's like a comic strip. That's just a story. The carnal mind is enmity against God. It's not subject to the law of God. Neither indeed can be. Carnal people can't understand spiritual things. Until Christ takes hold of a life, they can't understand why one gets up and goes to church, sings in the choir, why they take the ridicule of the culture, and yet they remain faithful to a Christ that they never seen visibly, just felt in their heart and found him through the reading of his word. So Jimmy's reading the word, sharing faith. He goes out to a Christian school in Queens. I go to Grady. I'm the next step to juvenile hall. I'm the next step to prison. Jimmy is out in his Christian school, coming back to the neighborhood with Christian books and talking about God and a creator God and all this. And we try to avoid him. Every time we see him come, we duck, man. Here comes Isaiah. And we're going to be preached to and preached to. One day I'm playing hooky. That's supposed to be in school. I'm not. I'm walking down the street away from the school, and there's a friend of mine, Richard, coming the other way to the school. He's smiling because he just got out of reform school, and he's breathing in the fresh air in Brooklyn. And the air's fresh in Brooklyn when you've been in reform school. He's coming back to school, and he sees me. And I say, hey, man, what are you doing? He says, I'm going to school. I said, school? You don't want to go to school, same teachers, same problem. He says, I got to go. He says, they'll catch me, and they put me away. I'll be there till I'm 21. And then I thought about this kid, Jimmy, out in this Christian school in Queens. This kid would get on a train 2 hours each way every day to get a Christian education in Queens while I'm going to Grady. So I thought, if something comes in my mind, go see Isaiah. He's in a Christian school. I remembered the name of the street in Queens. I say, hey, man, let's go out to see Jimmy. You know, Isaiah, yeah. He's in a Christian school. No one will look for you and me in a Christian school. And he laughs. He says, yeah, I guess not. So we get on a train, we go out there, walk in, black leather jacket, skull, blood dripping over the skull, switchblade in my pocket, looking cool. The Fonz wasn't cool, man. I was cool. Walk into this school, and down the center car, it's quiet, man. I'm used to a school where they're fighting and knifing. You go up the down staircase, you find someone's stomach cut open for cookie money. I mean, or overdosing on the roof, and they strip him of his clothes to sell it, throw him off the building. You know, here, this is my world. And now it's quiet. And I said, this can't be a school. This must be a morgue. And there was my first day. And as I go, she says, you want to go see him? He's up in chapel. I'd never been in a chapel in my life. Chapel? I said, what's chapel? She said, well, it's like assembly in public school. I said, yeah, I'd go up. I didn't want to go out. The police out there, I'd safer in here. Just as I put my hand on the door, she says, oh, by the way, it's week of prayer. I burst out laughing because week of prayer, I can't pray 2 seconds. How they pray for a whole week. I couldn't understand it. My first encounter, I went in a chapel, and that day I spent in a chapel. Didn't listen much.
Yeah.
Then that week transpired. I stole a boat that week. I'm out in a boat. The boat, wind, storm comes up. The boat's filling with water, and it looks like it's sinking. My brother says, bail. I take off my motorcycle boot. I'm trying to bail a boat out in Gravesend Bay. It's not good. It's going down. There are no atheists in sinking boats.
Oh, yes.
Crashing planes. That's the first prayer I ever prayed. Was in a stolen boat in Gravesend Bay. I got on my knees in the water. I said, God, get me in and I'll be good. He knew better than that. He knew better than that. See, if we ever tell people that God only hears the prayers of good people, good little boys and girls, what a deceptive way. That's not our God. Our God hears the prayers of bad little boys and girls. And there's this bad little boy, teenager. I pray, God, get me and I'll be good. And riff in the cloud, the sun comes through in a boat, coming speedboat, pulls us in.
Praise God.
Forgot the prayer.
Yeah.
Next day, played hooky. All that week, things transpired. I was stealing a pocketbook one night. Grabbed it. When I grab it, women cry, old lady, I'd knock her down. That's what sin does to a person. But I grabbed the pocketbook, started pulling, she cried out, and I started to cry. I never cried. Big boys don't cry. You're taught that, man. You get beat up. You get initiated in a gang, they give you enough to cry. You don't cry. And I'm crying. I let go and I ran. I didn't know what it was. It was the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
He was working on my heart. The next night, I was supposed to go out and steal a car. There was a knock on the door, and there was Jimmy. The guys went out that night, got caught, sent away. I went on to become a Christian. I gave my life to Christ.
Wow. You know, it occurs to me, the Lord was setting you up, man. You know, for that little lady to travel from Bay Ridge, Coney Island, all the way into the city to go to a meeting at Carnegie Hall. That's like going from Earth to the moon.
That's right. You never went there.
You stay, if you're in Brooklyn, you stay in Brooklyn. You don't go to Manhattan or you don't go to Queens. You stay there. So for her to do that shows that God was working certainly in her life, into Londa's life, and then working his way right through to you.
It was amazing.
That's powerful.
And you know, the amazing thing is that particular meeting actually set evangelism back tremendously, because there are always those who are against evangelism. And they looked at that meeting and they said, all that money spent, biggest, finest hall in the country.
Yeah.
All of this, and they only baptized a few people. And it was an embarrassment to Elder Anderson. And you and I were at Meyer Hall, I believe it was, at TCU.
That's right.
With a camp meeting put together by Cyril Miller. And he had all of these individuals. He brought you in, Cox in, Anderson. And I said, Ron, have you ever talked to Elder Anderson about this? And you said no. And I said, let's go down and meet him.
Meet him.
Tell us about that conversation.
Yeah, it was behind the hall. It was behind the platform.
I remember.
And they were going to have 3 preachers every night.
Yeah.
R. Allen Anderson from 6:30 to 7:30. Cox with his 13 projectors from 7:45 to 8:45. And then I was supposed to follow this at the end and do my thing. I went to the back, and he was standing, a little old man by then. He was an old man. And I walked up to him. I said, I'd like to introduce myself. I think you introduced me.
Yeah, we were with him, yeah.
I said, R. Allen Anderson, I'm Ron Halvorsen, and I just wanted to thank you for that great meeting you had in Carnegie Hall where you baptized thousands of people.
Yeah.
And he looked at me in surprise.
And you said, including me.
Yeah, including me. He looked surprised. He says, oh, no. He says, I only baptized just a few. I says, no. You baptized a little old woman from Brooklyn, and she came back and won her grandson, who became the pastor of the largest Seventh-day Adventist church in Sligo Seventh-day Adventist
Jim
Church.
Landis. Yeah.
A tremendous, intelligent teacher and preacher.
Great man.
One of our great teachers and preachers.
That's right.
And he was just a teenager, and he won me to Christ. And by that time, just in crusades in North America, I'd baptized well over 5,000 people into the kingdom. And I told him that. And you remember his reaction.
Yeah. He broke down and cried.
He broke down and cried.
Because you see, we never know what's happening when we're preaching the gospel. We may look at something and think it's a failure, but God's failures, or the failures we think are man's failures, God turns into super successes. And that's why you keep preaching the gospel. You may have a meeting where you think nothing happens, but there's somebody there that the Lord Jesus has already loved and already wanted.
That's
and
right.
Already called him.
When I became a Christian, we held an evevangelistic meeting. My friend Jimmy and I was 16, going on 17, whatever. I was just learning to read. We preached in a bookie joint in Brooklyn. His grandfather hired a bookie joint for us.
Yeah.
On Thursday night. We had a little pump organ. Kids from the Academy Christian School came, teenagers.
Yeah.
And Jimmy preached one night, I preached one night. I was so illiterate with the Word of God. I preached on David in the lion's den. Come on, he did have a show near a lion's. But I preached with such a passion, enthusiasm.
You convinced them there was such a thing.
They convinced that there had to be. But the first person was my mother.
Isn't that great?
And there in that meeting, she received Christ.
Yeah.
Became a Christian.
Yeah.
My mama was faithful to God to the day I buried her in Brooklyn.
You know, the amazing thing, Ron, I was just a kid. I'm a little younger.
Yeah,
than you.
you're a kid.
And I was just a kid. And they ran the story about that with a picture of you and Jim in the Review. Right. And it was either Review or one of the kids' magazines, because somebody showed it to me and I read it. That was an inspiration to me. Even at that age, I thought, if the Lord is using these guys, maybe he can even use me.
Yeah, right. It's hope. Gives people hope.
That's right.
See, that's why the Bible is so graphic. It's so, it grips you because it doesn't, this isn't little bedtime stories. This is gripping stories of real life, how the people hurt and how they fell and how they failed, and God always came back to them and loved them. And when I discovered that, when you give your life to Christ, you're transformed, but you got a whole lifetime. I took a temper with me through a lifetime.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Now, we need to mention, because they may be hearing some little noise coming through the microphones. We're in the middle of a rainstorm, I think this is.
A real rainstorm.
A real
Florida
rainstorm.
rainstorm.
Yeah, this is a Florida rainstorm, but we don't want to stop taping, so we're going to ask our viewers just to ignore that little pitter-patter you hear, because this is rain coming down, and we're sort of going now. We don't want to stop. The question I want to ask you, though, is once you gave your life to the Lord, Did evangelism occur to you right away? Did you know, because you sort of cut your teeth and made your name, like use those terms, as an evangelist. Did you pastor at all, or did you just move right into evangelism? Well, I obviously started very early.
What happened was, right away, I wanted to share faith. I mean, I was preaching on street corners. I was sharing on subways. I need a venue, so they rented this little bookie joint. The moment I received Christ, I had the calling of God to preach. But I didn't have none of the equipment. I mean, I was illiterate. I was just coming out of illiteracy. I was crude. I mean, I maybe still am. But what happened was, I had such a faith that I was going to be a minister and I was going to be an evangelist.
So you knew?
Oh, yeah, I knew. It was, that's what I'm going to do. That's my life.
So you went up to Atlantic Union College?
Went to Atlantic Union College, worked 40 hours a week, took a full load of college. Right. That's 2 years after I came out of this stuff.
Right. You finished up there, made good grades, didn't you?
No, not there. In fact, I always kid them. They took me on probation.
Yes.
I graduated on probation. The brethren have kept me on probation ever since.
You've been on probation ever since.
But in spite of it, I proved to them.
I got to ask you, though, a tough guy from New York City, leather jacket, skull and crossbones, now you're in Atlantic Union College. How was that change? That
well, it was different. I mean, I wore a different uniform. The first suit I ever had came from Dorcas. It was a dead man's suit. How do I know? Every time I hung it up in the closet, the arms folded. I mean, it was a terrible, rusty-colored suit, no one else would wear.
Yeah.
That's what I had, motorcycle boots. I never look at the exterior of a person.
Sure.
You see, my professors judge me for being ghetto. They told me to go into something else. Now they ask me to write books for them. Now, you see, don't ever judge a person.
God.
No.
Don't. My mother used to say, that's Brooklyn. My mother used to say, don't judge a book by its cover.
Sure.
Yeah.
We can look for the externals, and they look just right, but they're not right. We're all sinned and come short of the glory of God. We all need repentance. We all need conversion. We all need an experience with God. We need to be touched by the divine. And when that happened, I went off to preach. I went to preach. My first sermon, I worked 40 hours on this sermon. I'm in homiletics. I can't even say the word, no less take the course. And I studied, I preached, I practiced in front of a mirror. I mean, I worked on this thing 40 hours. Come to class, give this. My teacher says after, he says, you have to spend more time on your sermons. He said, in fact, you shouldn't be talking in front of people yet. How am I going to be a preacher not talking in front of people? So he said, practice. So I went out. It was a little cemetery across from Thayer Hall in AUC, an Indian cemetery. I'd bring my notes out and lay it on the tombstone, and I'd preach. Really, it's terrible preaching in a cemetery. Have an altar call. Who's going to respond? I mean, take up an offering. Who's going to give?
You don't get many amens.
I'm practicing, and I practiced every chance I got. I printed a card. Have Bible, we'll preach. That was the time they had a program called Have Gun, We'll Travel.
Sure.
I put Have Bible, we'll preach. Gave it to every minister that came on the campus. I wanted to preach.
Yeah.
I still want to preach.
So the fire was just in your bones from early on.
I love to preach.
Yeah.
Preaching is the whole. We've minimized the importance of preaching. Preaching, people still come for preaching.
Oh, yeah.
I went to Andrews University. I was just a young preacher. Still, the ghetto's still dripping. And they invited me week of prayer. I go in a sophisticated university church and walk up into this big pulpit, and pastor was so worried about your walk in just correct, sit just correct, not worrying whether the Holy Spirit's taking control of your life or not. So I preached. I fell into the pulpit 2 times that night. And so I announced that at the end of the week, we're going to have a big baptism. So the pastor, sig dignified, PhD, THD, DDT, really impressive. Really impressive. He says to me, well, do you have a candidate? I said, no, but God has many. And at the end of the week, we baptized 24 university students.
Praise God. Praise God.
You see, and I went there, and an English teacher came up after I preached and said, you made 27 grammatical mistakes. I said, only 27?
Yeah.
Being facetious. I'm getting good. A few nights later, I was down to about 12. I said, man, I'm improving.
Yeah, right.
So finally, I got ticked. I'm righteous ticked. I call it righteous indignation. My wife calls it something else. But I looked at the English teacher. I said, friend, you put a tent on that street corner. I'll put a tent on this street corner. We'll see who goes to whose tent to listen. Yeah. I said, my mother used to say, the proof is in the pudding.
That's
and
right.
I went, and the people would come to my tent.
Praise
Believe
God.
me, they'd come to the tent.
Yeah. Well, this is where I actually got acquainted with you, and you probably don't remember this, Ron, but I was your dry cleaning man And I would come by. I was
in AUC?
At Andrews,
yeah.
when you were there at the seminary.
Right.
And I would come by and pick up a little laundry, a little dry cleaning, whatever for you. And that's how we got acquainted. Then Elder Merrill Mills had called you to go back to Southern New England.
That's right.
You went back, and where did you go when you got to Southern New England?
I went to a small district, Quinnebog, Putnam, and Willimantic.
Wow.
The one church was in a cemetery.
Yeah.
It was dead. I had 40 members on the book, and there were about 8 coming.
Right.
And it was right in a cemetery. In fact, they stored bodies in the winter. I don't think they got rid of all the bodies because they just sat them up.
Right.
Because they were, I couldn't get an amen out of the congregation.
The amazing thing about this district, Ron, you were there, what, 4 or 5 years?
I was there about 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. Okay. That district had you, then after that, Russell Burrell.
That's right.
And then Mark Finley.
That's right.
And it still didn't grow. So it's not when you've got 3 guys like that going into a district, it's not necessarily the pastor's fault.
It was interesting. Then they moved me to
New London. Yeah.
And that's, I put up a bubble. Remember? And you tell that story.
Well, he put up this oratorium.
The oratorium.
And in those days, I was a bit of a joker, and I called him and I said, I put on this accent. Is this the man that's got the this air tent out here on the highway? It's all over the road. I said, it's all over the road. Yeah. He hung up, said, he was heading on
out
it.
there and it's standing up. Then Jim called me back.
I called him, and we had a little fun with it.
We had a great time.
But we did. And the amazing thing about that meeting, I remember, Ron, the first time that you changed your preaching style. I was at a workers' meeting in New Haven. Russell Adams was there too. You'd just gotten a book by Barclay on the life of Christ.
Yeah, the life of Christ.
And then you had gone into your manuscript writing style. And when we read that, and Ron went through some of his preaching, we said something really dramatic has happened to Ron's preaching.
And I would read 4 books a week. In those days, for 20, 30 years, I read 3, 4 books a week.
Right.
Because, I wanted to, learn. I didn't want to make 29 grammatical mistakes. But God can still use you if you make 29 grammatical mistakes.
That is correct. And your preaching, you were growing so much as a preacher, and we saw it. And we saw how the Lord was using it. And actually, being in that district gave you a little more time to study than if you'd been in that first district you were in. Right. You were able to go down that basement and work on those messages.
We baptized Mark Finley's mother in that air tent.
That's right.
And his 2 sisters in
that
air tent.
That is correct.
Wow.
So the Lord has really, really led in your ministry. And at that time, I know that there were discouraging moments. I remember one time I was visiting with you, and you were looking across at one of the big boat manufacturers, and you said I could go over there and make enough money that my family could actually eat, because as pastors, we weren't making much money.
We weren't making much in those days,
and very little, and barely getting by.
These days either.
And you had 2 little children, and Carol was doing the best as a family you could to make it. But the Lord pulled you through. Right. And we had a good president. Merrill Mills was a good man.
He was a good man. He really was. And the reason he hired me, all the other kids had better grades and everything, and they dressed good, and all had a dead man suit, And so Merrill said to me, he said, well, what if we don't give you a call in the ministry? I said, Pastor Mills, I said, you give me a call, I'll preach for you. If you don't, I said, I'll preach. I can preach on street corner. But I'm going to preach.
Yeah.
I said, I can't go teach. I don't want to go do this. Everybody gave him an out.
Right.
If I didn't get this, I can do this.
Right.
But I said, no, there's no out. I said, I didn't choose this. God chose this.
Right. Right.
And that's why he hired me. He told me that later.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yes, he was.
Do you remember, other than the meeting you ran with Landis, your very first evangelist crusade?
Yes, I do. I was there in that first district, Quinnebog. I was in a little town called Webster, Massachusetts. Hard-nosed town. I just had a course on evangelism from Andrews. I thought I knew everything about it. I rented a armory.
Yeah.
We had about 15 members in Quinnebog and 8 in Putnam, about 20 miles away. Rented this big armory. So I said, well, I can't fill the armory. I'll build a platform, put it halfway. It was you could play 2 full courts of basketball.
So big place, good size.
Big place. So I'll put it halfway. I can at least fill half. The Lord can fill the half of it. So I got all ready, man. I sent out 30,000 handbills. I figured 30,000 handbills, man. No, excuse me. It was 10,000 handbills. 10,000 handbills. I said, wow. I said, I'm going to fill this place. So I was behind the platform waiting, and the door would swing open, and boom, and then you wouldn't hear the door for 10 minutes more, boom. I said, boy, I hope they're all rushing in it each time the door opens. When I came out, there were 28, 30 people there. It was big, and I put chairs everywhere. And I preached, and there was only 2 non-Christian, or 2 people that hadn't received Christ in their life. And the whole crowd, the rest were Christians, or they were Adventist Christians, some of them, and, you know. I preached 28 nights there. Took chairs out, spread them out, man, pushed the we were almost in the vestibule by the time I got to the end of the meeting. At the end, I baptized 1 person, led him to Christ, out of 2. Yeah. So the president, Merrill Mills, saw me a month later, and they were all too busy to come to my meeting, but, you know, that's how it is. And they said, well, how did your meeting go? I said, great. I said, we baptized 50%. There were 2 coming. I baptized 1.
Right.
And he said, what? He said, 50%. I said, yeah. 2 were coming. I baptized 1. That was where my first evangelistic meeting, and I went on from there.
Now, you knew, and you know, you were called to preach.
Yeah.
Did that discourage you? Did it fortify you?
No.
What did that 1 out of 2 do for you?
You always get discouraged. I mean, you know, it's just like Elijah. The moment you have Carmel, you even on big meetings. I just had a meeting recently in San Bernardino. I baptized 368. I mean, after I'm retired. But after the meeting, I still was a little discouraged because there's people that should have come that didn't come, and there were people who should have been involved that weren't involved. So you always have that. I had a down. You always have a down. When you have to leave them.
Oh, yes.
Secondly, you don't get what you know God wanted to get.
Yeah. You don't let an evangelist make any decisions for the first 2 weeks after he was
I had a
period.
And then I said, well, I'll try it again. And I held it out in another place. I baptized 6. So I said, well, 6 is better than 1. Bring 6 people to Christ, better than 1. And then finally in New London, I put up that air tent. That was the 3rd meeting.
That was a
and
breakthrough.
we baptized 39 people in that meeting.
Right.
And from then on, it was so ingrained in me.
Yeah.
I went from there to field schools. I held 36 field schools.
Now, for those who may not know what a field school is, define a
field school is where you take the young fellows from the seminary or from the theology department of different colleges, and they come out in the summer and they spend a time with you in preparation for meetings, and then during the crusade they learn. You teach them in a day, you take them out visiting, and so I don't know if there's many more that have had 36.
That's got to be close
they have
to.
Naughty for that now.
Right.
All kinds of things that do that.
But there's still others that do the field schools along with them. But Ron, you were ordained in New England.
Yes.
And I was at your ordination.
You were?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So
and I was with you the night.
You'd check in.
Well, I was a young pastor there, you know.
Check
and I was with you the night before.
I wonder why I was so successful,
and
Jim. You were always
I was
there
emulating you, right?
You were pushing
and
me
I was working on my Brooklyn accent.
You were working on it.
as a Texan,
yeah.
But yeah, I remember the night before your ordination. And you were in charge of security on the campground.
Right, that's
Do you remember that night?
Yeah, forget it. I was in charge of security, and the night before, a gang from the town had come and disturbed the meeting. The youth meeting was outside the campgrounds.
Right.
And so that next night, Elder Pearson, just elected General Conference President, was going to be there for the meeting, and Bach, who was the president then, said, we don't want them to be disturbed. This gang came and they really disturbed. They fooled around with the girls. They brought ghetto blasters and were vulgar. And so I said, well, I'll go down and watch it. So Elder Deagle, Pastor Deagle was with me. We went down. I stood on the front of the porch of this church, and up the block comes these 6, 7 guys from the town. Ghetto blaster going away. Cigarette, you know, and they're really looking cool and coming up. And they're walking up the steps in and towards the church. I said, well, fellas, you're gonna have to turn that off and, you know, throw your cigarette out and come on in. He said, and he said, your mother, you know, he started using words that, you know, unfit for the human vocabulary. And I said, well, I'm not looking for trouble. I said, but this is a church meeting, and we wouldn't disturb your church. I said, we're not going to have you disturb this church. So I came down the steps, and I said, please, you know, leave. And I turned around, and he grabbed my coat, tried to get it over my arms so I couldn't fight back. Yeah. And then I turned around, and he tried to kick me where he shouldn't. This is all happening and within a second. So I hit him. Yeah. I mean, this is the night before my ordination. I hit him, decked him. He went down. He was bleeding all over the place. I grabbed his head. There's 5 other guys. I said, don't move. I said, you come a step. Always get the leader. You get the leader, you got the gang. Yeah. So I said, you know, he's bleeding like, you know, all over the place. And here I am, my new ordination shirt, blood all over my new suit. And I'm holding him, and these guys are stepping back. You know, they see this, their fearless leader. He's really out of it. And just then the meeting breaks up. And everybody comes out of the meeting. Here I am holding this guy's head. He's bleeding all over me. And so I said, now I'm going to release you. Walk straight. Don't turn left or right. I said, I'll be on you. Well, he walked away. He came back the next day, saw the preacher who was on the gate, and said, who was that preacher last night? It took 26 stitches in his mouth, around his lip, his tongue, to close this fella. He said, who? And they said, of all the preachers on this campground you picked on, then he told a little bit about that I was a fighter. And I was terrible. I thought he wouldn't ordain me, you know. I was nervous. My wife, you know, she sees blood all over me. What happened, you know? But so that's what I'm notorious. So they know me for that.
Loerbach understood you were fulfilling it. He was another good man.
Oh, he was. But the only problem with that is every time he introduced me after that, he introduced me as the fighter. And he tells this story. Hey, I'm mild and meek in my old age.
And here we are 40 years later, and I'm not letting it pass either.
You're not asking me about my exposition, my theological approach to say, what about that night?
We felt like you had the right approach for what was happening at the moment.
Yeah, it was. God has been so good.
The night before my ordination, I spent in front of a committee. I think he had more fun.
I think so too. Well, he was concerned. I remember the time, and he really was. And Elder Bach quickly told him, "You don't have a thing to worry about."
He says, "I told you to protect them, and you did."
That's right. Absolutely. And I tell you, they used to run articles about this in the Clinton paper about the former gang leader from Brooklyn who's now head of security at the camp meeting. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, we didn't have no problem with the gangs.
No, right. Some of those articles that they ran at that time.
It's amazing, isn't it, what God does?
Yeah. And that's the whole thing of what we're talking about. God finds somebody in an unlikely place. When that person responds to God, allows him to do things in his life, the change takes place. And he shares that change with others. Right. And how many thousand now, Ron, have been touched? It's I know
you can't only. We know that just in evangelistic meetings in North America, it's been well over 10,000 people we've baptized in our series. In fact, in the last 2 years, I've baptized well over 1,000 meetings. I'm 70 years old. Right. I'm still going.
Fantastic.
But it's God's. I only give God glory. What I love about evangelism more than almost anything is that you're a team. Mm-hmm. Your success depends on the pastors that are with you. I've always recognized that. You work as a team. They're open. They're helping. Of course, sometimes you have people that aren't willing and willing, but majority of them are humble and wanting to see the kingdom of God built up, and that's what we're here for. Yeah. You see, to win a soul is the most important thing that we have to do. Yeah. I've pastored large churches. I mean, we had prayer meetings. You remember it, 1,200, 1,500 for 4 years. Right. 6 buses, loads of people. But that was wonderful. I'd love to preach, but I'd rather preach to one sinner at the gate of hell than the whole choir.
So you are at heart an evangelist, even more than a pastor. You're calling it evangelist.
Soul winner, evangelism. Whatever means evangelism. Public evangelism was my gift. But I think every minister should be a soul winner.
Absolutely.
Every minister should be a soul winner, whether he's one-on-one, but he's leading a soul to Christ. You can't get done a year, and what have you done with your congregation? You haven't led anyone to Christ. Yes. You haven't led anybody through the waters of baptism, have their sins washed away and invigorated with the Holy Spirit.
That's right.
So that's now.
You cut your teeth in a tough part of the country, New York, New England. That's where you got started. How did that color your ministry? Because those are tough, you know, say what you want about New England, it's secular, it's into a whole lot of stuff. That's where you sort of cut your teeth.
What helps me, for instance, 65–70% of the people I baptize are men. What prepared me for that? You take most evangelists, they don't do that.
No, that's true.
I had an altar call just at a camp meeting recently. About 60 people came forward for baptism, and about 40 of them were men. So the ruggedness, like Peter, that's a gift. You see, these little pampy little theologians who look down at us don't understand that we are a part of this church. We're talking to blue collar. I'm talking to gangbangers. I'm talking to. I work in Greenwich Village, and gangbangers come to Christ, and 3 of them become ministers. I mean, I'm talking to Rick and Gwen Shorter, music director of Hair, lead them to Christ and to faith. A gangbanger in San Bernardino I led to Christ, right down in the front of the auditorium. Came, fell on my shoulder with all the gang tattoos, just out of prison, spent 14 years or 28 years in prison. God gave me the ability to talk to those people. I worked with the drug addicts in New York, the hippies and yippies. I went through that stage. The yippies and hippies and wongums and freebie gypsies. And how could who else could he use to go down there into the inner city and to talk to those people? To go to Harlem, the only white man in Harlem, and survive it. And lead men and women to Christ. Lead the weaponry experts of the Black Panthers to Christ. Lead. You see, everyone has the gift. Everyone has a gift that God can use wherever you are. So some of the eyes, some of the ears, he says, some of the feet, whatever I want to be whatever God wants you to be. But it's helped me. That gangbanger in San Bernardino gives his life to Christ, wants to be baptized. Thursday night, drive-by shooting, they blow him away.
I got to cut you. We are at the close of our first hour, so stay by and we'll be right back.
Well, if you turn off your television today, you are going to miss the most exciting interview that perhaps we've ever done.
Yeah.
At least most interesting, wouldn't you say so, C.A.?
Of the Heritage Series interviews that we've done thus far, and all of them have been great.
Oh, they have
But
been.
our guest today brings a little special something. Mostly for me, he's a New York guy.
Yeah.
And he's never lost that New York touch. But also he tells a great story, and he's lived a fantastic life for the Lord. He really has.
See, this is really true. And he was a person that the Lord just reached down into the ghetto and snatched him.
Yeah.
He took him. This is Ron Halvorsen we're talking about. And I think if any of you know who Ron is, then you know this is going to be an exciting interview. You are correct. Everybody we have talked to has just been very, very exciting. And this is our latest one, so this is the most exciting one to me.
It is. What's interesting, our editor, Len Wenzel, who's edited all of these, of course, he said, you know, it took me a little more time to edit this one because I was actually watching and listening.
There are houses there. And so
forth. There's neighborhood. It's neighborhoods, runs from Neptune Avenue up to Surf Avenue, and from West 1st Street to, 36th or something. And and Seagate. It goes out to Seagate.
Yeah.
And I was born in Bay Ridge, raised in Coney Island, West 6th Street and Neptune Avenue.
See, if you know New York, you can, that accent, which he has not lost, so he's been all over the world. I said Bay Ridge, Canarsie.
You were close.
Yeah, because that's a typical Brooklyn Bay Ridge kind of accent. He has not lost that all of the years.
Someone asked me once, they said, why do you keep this accent? I said, why? I mean, when I get to heaven, I have to learn it all over again. So, you know, I keep it. I keep it.
Elder, when did your parents come to this country? Your grandparents actually come to
My grandparents came the early, in the mid-20s. And they came from, my grandpa was a shipbuilder in Norway, the western part of Norway. And the Halvorsens are shipbuilders in Norway, even today. I was in Australia, in fact, I saw Halvorsen shipbuilders. And so my grandfather came here to Brooklyn. Paulson, the president of the General Conference, he's a Norwegian, and he said, well, the Halvorsens stopped in Brooklyn. Every other Norwegian went to Minnesota. I told him the reason we stopped in Brooklyn was because there was a bar and grill on every corner in Brooklyn. So that's why we got stopped in Brooklyn. But my dad was, all the boys and girls were born in Norway except my father. My grandmother was pregnant for my father. She was impregnated in Norway, but he was born in Brooklyn. So he's best of both worlds anyway. And we were raised there in Coney Island in a tenement, you know, and spent most of my time till I was 18. And then I moved to Queens. My parents moved out to Long Island, but I still stayed in the city until I went off to college.
Elder, you alluded to
some interesting dialogue ahead, because anytime you get two New Yorkers together, it's bound to be a very interesting conversation. But we have been just talking a little bit before we began about your actually being born. You were born in a hospital that was a little different than your brothers and sisters were born in. And I've often wondered why you spelled your name a little differently than your brother spells his, Richard.
Well, the family thinks I don't want to be connected, but that's not the real reason. The reason was that I was born in a Norwegian hospital in Brooklyn. Yeah. And my other brothers were born in a Jewish hospital. And somehow they spelled the name in the Jewish hospital, Halvorsen, V-E-R-S-E-N. But when I was born in a Norwegian hospital, Norwegian descent, the Norwegian doctor saw that name and he says, I'm not going to make a Swede of you. You're a Norwegian boy. So he spelled it V-O-R-S-E-N. And that was the original spelling when our grandparents came from Norway. So I took that, and it was on my birth certificate. And the family has disputed it for many years, but I finally proved it when I went to Norway. I went to Norway, and the Norwegians accepted me as a Norwegian. When my brother went there, they says, you're not a Norwegian. You don't spell your name like a Norwegian. So I'm the authentic breed. The others are just, you know, they're just part of the clan.
So you were born in Brooklyn, New York?
Brooklyn, New York, that's right.
And grew up where?
Once the 4th largest city in America.
Yes, right. And then you grew up where?
I grew up in Coney Island, which was just a part of Brooklyn. Okay. Yeah, it was once an island, then they made it a peninsula. They covered it in, and it became a peninsula. It was the amusement center, and it was also a crime center. But Coney Island at that time, anyway, it was more the inner city than it was what it is now, more middle-class people.
See, most of us have only heard of it as an amusement center. You mean that?
Because Ron is a unique individual. Of course, you know him very well. He's from a tough section of Brooklyn. When he tells about the part of Brooklyn that he grew up in, I know that section of Brooklyn. It's tough to this day, and kids come out tough. And the Lord really reached down and plucked a brand from the burning in bringing Ron Halvorsen, and he's lived such a wonderful life for the Lord.
Well, it's such an exciting story, and it really ties back to an evangelistic campaign that people thought was a failure. It was held by R. Allen Anderson in New York City at Carnegie Hall. And they just thought this campaign was a total failure. It just about destroyed evangelism in North America. And then 2 ladies accepted the Lord. Now, there were others that were baptized as well, But these were two ladies that they could point to that just walked in off the street.
Yes, yes.
One of them had a grandson, Jim Landis.
Yes.
And the lady brought her grandson to the Lord. Her grandson just got on fire for Jesus. Jim Landis did.
Yes.
And he went and shared with Ron.
With Ron.
And you're going to hear that story. Ron wasn't an easy person to share with or to witness to. He was a rough guy, a switchblade carrying, street gang leader, leather jacket type, just would steal anything that wasn't tied down. I mean, he tells this story, folks.
Yeah.
And God saw something in this man.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Jim, and our viewers should look out for this. Ron was a tough guy, and his fists were flying up until the night of his ordination.
Yeah, yeah, you'll hear about that.
There's a cute story, too, with that.
You'll hear about that. And the Lord converts, but the Lord does not always change our personalities immediately. And some of those things take a little longer. Some of us are still battling with some of those things. Yes. But this is one of the most exciting conversion stories and ministry stories that I have ever witnessed. Because, you know, those of our group that we have talked to almost exclusively had parents who really loved the Lord, who embraced this message, and who nurtured those young people through their youth, and were such a great example. One of which, Elder Bradford's mother, actually worked for Ellen White.
Yes, spoke with her.
But now this is the example of someone who their parents knew nothing about this faith or perhaps any faith. And yet God reached down, plucked him, took him. He's been an influence to his own family and to thousands and thousands and thousands of people all over the world.
Sort of pulled himself up by his bootstraps and was possessed of a desire to preach that has not abated to this very day.
No, that's right. He's one of the very finest speakers that we have in our denomination.
Yes.
Without a question.
Very, very true.
A prayer warrior, a man that loves prayer, believes in prayer, does a lot of prayer walking, has written a book about prayer. And it's one of the best sellers for prayer.
I think one of the most popular books on prayer, used in prayer meetings across the world, let alone the country.
Yeah.
Powerful.
So we got in touch with Ron while we were in Tampa, Florida. We were there at Mount Calvary Church doing a special program, and this is the interview that we had with Ron Halvorsen in Tampa. We welcome you to the fourth installment in our Heritage series. We have been talking to some of God's leaders, people who committed their lives to Jesus Christ when they were in their youth, and how the Lord has used them in furthering the gospel. And we have such a person today, Elder Ron Halvorsen. And Pastor Ron Halvorsen, we welcome you to our program today. And C.A. and I count it a real privilege to visit with you and to talk with you. I'm an old Texan, but, you know, I went to New England when I was young, and we became friends at that time. And we got a couple of New Yorkers here, and I know that we've got